His voice was silent when he heard the diagnosis: you have throat cancer. Producer, piano player, songwriter, Buddy Hyatt. We know him as the former member of Toto, the rock group from the 80s, with such hits as Rosanna, Hold the Line, and Africa. He's performed, produced, and worked with amazing talents: Lee Greenwood, Randy Travis, Mickey Gilley, Lynn Anderson, Tracy Lawrence, just to name a few. And Buddy has been recording in Nashville on Music Row for over 30 years. But today, he holds the line as he watches what God is doing in his life and walking him through the diagnosis of throat cancer. This is his story of unshakable faith. This is today's Nashville. Buddy, I am so excited to be with you today, and I'm so honored that you'll be able to share your amazing story of faith. I have a girlfriend that's a mutual friend of yours, and she was sharing your story with me. And I said, I have got to get in touch with him because I want to share your story with our viewers. We are in your home studio.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm just so honored to be here.
I'm honored to have you all here, and thank you for thinking of me and allowing me to be on your show.
Well, you have quite the history. Record producer, but let's go back a little bit to the 80s and 90s and where it started when you received the phone call to be part of the Toto band.
That was 1998, and cell phones were kind of a new invention at that point, and I had one, and it rang, and I did not recognize the number. So I answered it, and it was a very heavy British accent speaking gentleman, and he just basically said, would you like to tour with Toto? And I said, who in the heck is this? And he proceeded to tell me his name, and he asked me, would I be interested in touring with Toto? But he did not elaborate on what they wanted me to do, and most people who know anything about me or the work that I do, I'm a piano player, keyboard player by trade. And I just assumed that they needed an extra one, because anybody that knows Toto knows that David Page is Toto. He is the keyboard player, constructs most of the songs, arranges and writes most of the material. So I knew they didn't need me to take his job. In the course of our conversation, it kind of got comical because he kept on asking me if I would move to LA and play and
well, who were you talking to?
This gentleman was their road manager.
Oh, okay.
All right, let's rewind the tape just a little bit. He owned a condo on West End Avenue here in Nashville, and he went to collect the rent. His tenant was blasting one of my contemporary Christian CDs that I had done in 1997. And I had done that CD as not only a player, but a singer and writer. So he said, hey, what's this guy's number? So they called. Long story short, he didn't tell me what they wanted me to do, and I just assumed they needed a second keyboard player.
Oh, okay.
I was wrong. So the next day I got a FedEx with 7 Toto CDs and a round trip first class American Airlines plane ticket to Los Angeles. And I thought, well, if this is a joke, it's a pretty elaborate one. Now, let me rewind why I thought it might have been a joke, is because one of my closest, dearest friends is the original bassist for Toto, David Hungate, and he lives here and lived here at that time. He had left Toto years before, and he and I were buddies, and I thought he was playing a joke on me. Wasn't a joke. So I fly out there, they limo me to the rehearsal hall, I walk in, and there is a keyboard and there's a microphone with a straight stand pointed the other direction, and I'm thinking to myself, how are these guys going to know if I can play with the band if there's no band? That's very important to Nashville musicians, is how well you play together. Whether you play in time with the drummer, whether you race ahead of the bass player, whether you're in tune with the guitar player, all that is important. None of that could happen with just a keyboard and a microphone stand. So I just kept my mouth shut and looked around the room, and they all come out, all the Toto members at the time, Steve Lukather, Mike Porcaro, Bobby Kimball, David Page, and Simon Phillips. They came out, and only one of them would greet me, and that was Bobby Kimball, the lead singer. He's a Southern boy, by the way. He's from Louisiana. He came and gave me a big handshake and a big smile and introduced himself, and the rest of them had their sunglasses on and pretty much just looked at the floor and wouldn't acknowledge me. And I thought, I don't know if I want to work with people like this. But I went through with the interview. David Page sat down and he one-fingered, he just real simple one-fingered a harmony part on that keyboard, as though not to stump me. He didn't want to go too fast for me. Well, I had my Nashville numbers system. I had my paper and I wrote down the numbers of the notes that he played. And then Bobby Kimball stepped up to the mic and we sang those intervals together.
Interesting.
Well, it was correct because I heard it, I wrote it, I did what I do in Nashville, and I write the numbers charts. So he said, let's do this one. And he one-fingered another part, real simple to make sure it wasn't too fast for me, and I wrote it down. And I sang that the way that he played it, and he said, let me see that. And I handed him my paper, and it was a little, I love David, don't get me wrong. He's a nice guy, but he was not in a good mood that day. He jerked it out of my hand. He looked at it, and I'm going to paraphrase. He said, that's that Nashville beep. And I took it back and I said, that Nashville beep works for me. Well, at that time now, of course, here we are. I don't want to date our interview, but this was 22 years ago. I was much less gracious 22 years ago, and I had much less of Jesus in me then. And so I was not very polite. I basically said, this works for me, and this is what I do. This is how I do it. So he got up and started walking. He took off walking. And I thought, well, there goes that gig. They're not going to hire me now because I just popped off to the boss. He got clear to the other end of the room and he threw his hand up and he said, you got the gig. And I looked at Steve Lukather, the guitar player, and he was angry. His face was red because I had popped off to the boss. And I said, what gig? And he said, we need a background singer. And I said, what does it pay? And he told me, and I said, I think I can do that. It was like 4 times what any musician would make in Nashville at that time. It was a lot of money. So I took the gig, and for 2 years I learned a lot from them. We became really close friends, and I got to hear the best musicians and the best music on the planet every night for 2 years.
And you went around the world.
I got to see the world and got paid to do it. We everywhere from Japan, the former USSR, all over Europe. It's an experience, an invaluable experience that I can't explain, and it would not have happened if not for music.
But God had other plans for you, didn't he?
He did. He's had his hand on me since I was born.
Buddy, tell me what happened when you got back from tour with Toto and you're back home in Nashville.
Well, Toto financially allowed me to invest in being a studio owner. I built a home studio and used my experience that I had learned from not only their recording but their live performances to make better recordings here in Nashville.
And you're known here in Nashville as a music producer, recorder, musician. So, you know, Toto, people kind of know you about that, but this is where your heart is.
It is. I moved here in 1983. There's a gentleman, he's still here in town. His name is Ron Cornelius. He, at that time, was working for Pete Drake. Pete Drake is an extremely famous steel guitarist, producer, had played with the Beatles and so many different famous artists. Ron Cornelius was running his publishing company, and he was the first person to give me an opportunity to work in the studio with real musicians.
And how long have you been recording here in Nashville?
Since 1983.
Wow.
And
Who have you worked with?
I've worked, well, the most famous person and my biggest bucket list was I got to produce 2 songs on George Jones in 2008. He had a big Irish tour coming up. So they brought the Irish country stars over here to record duets with George, and I was nominated to produce those.
Do you have a funny story, anything that you can share?
I've met so many wonderful people. I do have a funny story. In 1984, I was sitting in the green room at the Opry House in my tuxedo waiting to go on with the Four Guys. The Four Guys were a group similar to the Statler Brothers, a harmony group. And I felt this tapping on my shoulder. I looked, and it was Roy Acuff, and he had his fiddle bow, and he was tapping me on the shoulder. And I looked, and I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Son, do you want to play some Wabash Cannonball?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "A flat, have fun with it." And he turned around and walked to the stage, and I followed him. The then piano player, Jerry Whitehurst, was ill that evening and couldn't make it, and they just found out that he wasn't coming. So I was the only piano player sitting in the room, and he invited me, and I went out and I played Wabash Cannonball for the first time and the last time ever in my life in A flat, and I got through it, and it was a lot of fun.
What was that like, going out at a moment's notice?
It was amazing, but it was more of an honor than anything because, you know, Roy Acuff was and is the father of the Grand Ole Opry, and I just loved him and his music. I never thought I'd be invited to play with him, so it was wonderful.
Who are some other people that have influenced your life and your music?
Probably the biggest mentor of all of mine would have to be Lee Greenwood. Lee Greenwood's vocal style, he's also a fantastic piano player, which most people don't know. He's a fantastic saxophone player. I actually left Toto in 2000 to go to work for Lee Greenwood.
Really?
Yes, I would have rather play the piano with Lee Greenwood than sing background and play percussion with Toto. Now, call me crazy, everybody can laugh if they want, but I loved Lee's music and loved him.
What a true American patriot.
Yes, and what an opportunity for me to not only get to know him better, but to get to play the music that I grew up playing.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else you can think of?
Well, I have so many great friends at the Opry. Like I said, Daly and Vincent, they invite me the most often, but I've done the Opry with Lee Greenwood, Lori Morgan, just as a hired gun, more or less. If someone's piano player can't make it and they know that I'm capable of reading their charts, the numbers charts we spoke of, and they know I'll show up prepared and play their song in the right key, and that'll be that.
Well, let's talk about your faith a little bit.
Okay.
God has taken you down an amazing journey recently.
Yes. Well, I tell people I'm too soon old and too late smart. God got a hold of me when I was 8. Pardon me. But it took until I was in my 50s for him to get my attention. Mm-hmm. So I've always been a Christian since I accepted him at the age of 8, but I didn't live the life. I was basically just living my own life, doing my own thing, and not following what I knew I should be doing. And I had no idea that a cancer diagnosis would be his way of blessing me, getting my attention, and blessing me and using me to bless others.
Let's talk about that time when you heard you were diagnosed with throat cancer. What was that day like?
Well, I didn't believe it. I started having some pain, and I just thought I had strep throat and went to the doctor, went to several doctors, and they said, "No, you don't have strep throat, you're fine, just go on home and don't worry about it." And I thought, you know, there's something, pain of this nature is not normal. So I went to an ENT, and he did a thorough examination and said he felt like it was throat cancer. So they did a biopsy and came back that it was squamous cell carcinoma. It was very small at the base of my tongue, and they sent me to an oncologist. Well, let me back up a little bit. One of my now close friends, John Barry, who's a fabulous singer, country music artist, I'd met John one time in the dark outside the Opry as we were leaving back in 19. And if you recall, John had been through a cancer diagnosis also, and he had done very well and had come through the same type of cancer. It was on a different side, I believe. Long story not so long, my phone rang the day after my diagnosis, and I didn't answer it because, like most of us, we get calls and we don't know who it is, so we let it go to voicemail, or they'll text us. I sent the call to voicemail because I didn't recognize the number. Immediately a text comes through and it says, "Hey, this is John Barry. I'd like to talk to you about your cancer diagnosis." And I immediately called him right back. Was so glad to hear from him, and he was so gracious. He told me all what he'd been through. He gave me the name and number of his oncologist, said, "Please call him, tell him I sent you." And he said, "Can I pray with you?" And I said, "Absolutely." So, pardon me. So we prayed together on the phone, went and saw his oncologist. The way the Lord orchestrated everything, John's oncologist's wife was having a baby, so he was going to be out of town. He was off duty for about 10 days. They sent me to another oncologist. Long story short, I did not like what they had to say. They were going to remove my voice box. They were going to chemo and radiate me immediately. They were going to put a port in my stomach. They were going to do all this stuff, and I said, no, I'm not. I have faith that I'm going to be healed, and you're not going to do that to me.
Buddy, what did you do?
Well, my wife, Angela, and I were sitting in the office, and we didn't like anything that the oncologist had to say. So we politely said, we're not going to do that, and we're leaving. So he was visibly unhappy with me, and he said, well, it's not going to go away on its own. And I said, that's for me to worry about, not for you. So I got up and left. I began talking to a mutual friend of ours, Kelly Lang, T.G. Shepherd's wife, and she mentioned that a mutual friend of hers, Olivia Newton-John, had some serious cancer complications, and she had gone to a place called hopeforcancer.com in Mexico, Cancun, Mexico. And I thought, well, you know, if it worked for her, it'll work for me. And I prayed about it, and I had a peace about it. I just knew that I was not going to let them radiate me and chemo me. And they said, well, you've got maybe 4 years to live. And I said, well, if that's the case, I'm going to live it and enjoy every minute of it. But I'm not going to be laid up in a bed, 130 pounds, green, and wishing that I was dead. So I made the call, went to Hope for Cancer, did 3 weeks of immunotherapy. It was a wonderful experience. And as you can see, I'm sitting here before you. I feel, and I'm declaring that I'm healed in Jesus' name. Now, they may tell me, oh, you've still got a little bit of a bump here or whatever the next time they look at me, and I feel like $1 million. I've lost 50 pounds, and that's not from cancer treatment. That's from not eating garbage.
And how long has this been? How long?
Since December. I got the diagnosis in December, and then it was the end of April that we went to Mexico. And it was 3 weeks in Mexico. I go back at the end of August. I will say that it's a Christian-based organization. We have prayer service every morning, and they found out, of course, that I was a musician and had me help with the music in the morning at the prayer service. And there's a funny thing that they do there, and I say funny because people will find it humorous, that we call it the pizza oven. They put you in a full body heat therapy bed that gets your core body temperature up to 108 degrees for 45 minutes. Well, I have my hands free and my head is outside of the chamber. So I had my cell phone and I started writing a song. So I wrote a song for the clinic and donated it to them called "This Is Where Miracles Begin." Wow. That culminated into the founder hearing it, liking it, befriending me, and really going the extra mile to make sure that everyone heard the song.
Have you recorded it?
I have recorded it, and I have gifted it to him. His name is Dr. Tony Jimenez. He's the founder of Hope for Cancer in Tijuana and Cancun, Mexico. But long story short, my return visit at the end of next month is supposed to be very expensive. Because of the song, he has made it complimentary. My return visit and follow-up, and we've become real close friends. He's a wonderful man of God, and it could not have been a better experience.
Now the community has rallied around you.
Absolutely, and that's so amazing. All my heroes are now my friends. People like John Berry, Lee Greenwood, T.G. and Kelly, Lori Morgan. I know I'm leaving some very important people out, but they all came together, and every year they do the Keith Whitley Memorial Harley Ride and Concert. Well, Lori and her son Jesse Keith and their friend Chris Keefe, he spells it K-E-E-F-E, they all got together and said, let's do this for Buddy. Let's take all these ticket sales, silent auction, any proceeds that we get from this annual Keith Whitley celebration, we're going to donate to Buddy. And they did. I'm so thankful.
Buddy, where's God taking you now?
He's gotten my attention. Where's he taking me? Hopefully he's taking me to minister to other people who are going through either a cancer diagnosis or any kind of illness or a broken home or whatever. I feel now qualified to bring his love to them.
What would you say to somebody right now listening to you?
That there are so many simple scriptures that we overlook, and one is cast your cares, for his burden is light. And that's what I've done. And he's gotten me through this with flying colors. And without him, honestly, if I had chose door number one, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Yeah. What about your music?
Well, that's funny you should ask. My music has been on the back burner for 20 years. I mostly do other people's music. I'm now editing, mixing, co-producing the Bellamy Brothers, T.G. Shepherd, Johnny Lee, T. Graham Brown, Doug Stone, and a few other people that I've got Cletus T. Judd coming in tomorrow. We're going to do some funny music. But God has taken me into a place where I am now where he wants me to be. I am now an ambassador for him. I am not that wild and crazy, crude, loudmouth musician that tells the dirtiest jokes. And I'm not that guy anymore. And it's not because of me. It's because of him. Yeah.
He took you 50 years to
well,
this
I'm
point.
58, so it took 50 years.
Yeah, you said
yes.
when you became a Christian at the age of 8, 50 years later.
Yes.
So what's next for you?
Next for me is making the very best music I can possibly make. I'm making a name for myself here as a mix engineer. I'm most proud of the newest Bellamy Brothers song that they did a duet here with John Anderson. And the song is called No Country Music for Old Men. And it is talks about the state of Nashville's music nowadays. And you know what that is.
Well, Buddy, thank you so much. It's such a blessing to sit down. I was so excited to get this time to sit with you, that you could share your faith with others.
Thank you
God
so much
bless
for
you.
having me. God
I'm
bless
praying
you.
for you, too.
Thank you again. Thank everyone for the prayers. The prayers got me through.
My friend, are you going through a trial, a diagnosis that you heard, a shocking diagnosis? You know, I think about the woman who reached out and touched the cloak and the hem of Jesus. He is the healer of all. Put your faith in him so that you can share your story of unshakable faith with others that will give him honor and glory. This is today's Nashville. This is faith. I'll see you next time.
Cornerstone Television wishes to thank all our faithful viewers whose consistent prayers and financial support have made this program possible.